Our country risks being dragged back into the most devastating policy failure of the past few decades, and the Albanese Labor government is in denial about it. The collapse of our maritime border protection regime the last time Labor was in power cost at least 1,200 lives, churned more than 50,000 people through the trauma of extended immigration detention. It exposed the nation to security, health and quarantine risks. It undermined the integrity of our immigration system, and it cost as much as $15 billion.
The outstretched hand of a woman grasping for life as frantic rescuers try to drag survivors from the boiling sea.
We need to get life jackets down to these people.
This was the refugee boat just seconds before it was swamped by huge waves.
As we saw at Christmas Island in 2010, Labor's border protection failure was absolutely terrible in human terms more than anything else. And the idea that we would risk a return to those shocking days is beyond belief. Yet when 40 asylum seekers turned up on the remote coast of Western Australia on Friday, just 3 months after another group arrived in a similar fashion in the same area, this is what we heard from the Prime Minister.
I've been travelling in the car, so I haven't been advised about that, but our policies are very, very clear. Our policies are clear, which is that boats that arrive in that fashion, we have policies in place to ensure that they're dealt with.
Yeah, our policies are clear, only I can't really remember them. I'll just tell you that our policies are clear. We have a policy. That was a terrible, wishy-washy answer. Let me tell you, as someone who's dealt with this issue at home and abroad, as Chief of Staff to a Foreign Minister, this sort of weakness can be disastrous. And what a ridiculous cop-out to say he was in the car. What, his phone doesn't work in the car? When politicians are in between events on planes, trains and automobiles, that's when they get their information, take their calls, have their briefings. This answer is just weird from Anthony Albanese, and it reveals how panicked and defensive he is on this issue. Even though the arrivals clearly are a failure of border protection and a real worry, and I'll come to more on that in a moment, but even though this failure is clear, the Prime Minister still should have made absolutely sure that he sent a strong message. What he should have said was, these people are all in custody and they'll all go into immigration detention. We will not tolerate people coming illegally to this country in this way. They will be immediately flown to Nauru for offshore processing. And whether they're refugees or not, they will never, ever be settled in Australia. This is the last time these people will ever see Australia. Arriving illegally by boat is a guaranteed way to ensure you will never settle in Australia. There you go, Prime Minister. It's not that hard, is it? Be clear, be robust. Send the message that people must not try this. Instead, we get this sort of nonsense from Labor this morning.
We know that under the previous government, boats also made it to Australia. We didn't make a big deal about it because we know that you are helping the people smugglers when you do that. The head of Operation Sovereign Borders has made clear that nothing has changed.
Look, this is just plain wrong. No asylum seekers have made it by boat to the Australian mainland since April 2013, when Labor was last in power. Since then, boats have been intercepted and most often turned back thanks to the coalition's policies that Labor have reluctantly tried to continue. But they have changed them a bit. Labor has scrapped temporary protection visas. And while the head of Operation Sovereign Borders rightly says the aims of the operation haven't changed, obviously the performance and the outcomes have, because now, under Labor again, boats have been able to penetrate our border patrols twice and get all the way to our mainland coast and disembark passengers before presumably sailing off again undetected. What an absolute failure of Operation Sovereign Borders. What an absolute failure of our border protection regime. Yet now all we hear from Labor is people playing it down, trying to blame the opposition for drawing attention to the issue and pretending that there's no problem. All the wrong signals are being sent. I mean, after losing one High Court case about indefinite detention last year, the Albanese government immediately released all 149 convicted criminals, including 7 murderers and 37 sex offenders, from immigration detention. And as we learned last week, they are yet to officially apply to have a single one of them returned to detention to keep the community safe. What sort of a signal does this send? What strong message comes from a Prime Minister mumbling about not knowing anything because he was in a car? It took Albanese till today to work out what should be said, and even then he couldn't help but play party politics.
The people who were unauthorised arrivals into Western Australia just days ago now find themselves on Nauru, and they will not be settled here in Australia. We have clear positions in place, we'll continue to do so. Peter Dutton will continue to be a cheer squad for things that actually undermine our borders.
Look, this stuff is pathetic. You're in charge, Prime Minister. You're not opposition leader. It's not a game. You're in charge of national security and border protection. There's been a staggering failure. So don't play politics. Take some meaningful action. This is deja vu all over again, as they say. The same old Labor voices, their friends in the media and the activists who support them, once more denying the problem and pretending that they have the answers, that everything's under control. Have a listen to a former immigration official on the ABC this morning.
Is there an expectation that more boats will arrive after this one?
Well, that's possible, and we don't know what's driving this.
Yeah, even though he talks down any alarm, Abel Rivzi can't ignore the reality that more might be coming. 2 arrivals in 3 months after none to the mainland for a decade should set the alarm bells ringing. But listen to more of this unchallenged nonsense from Rivzi on the ABC.
Mr Dutton has a very long history of telling us we're about to receive another armada of boats. I can remember at least half a dozen instances in the last decade when Mr Dutton or one of his colleagues has said something the Labor Party has done will lead to an armada of boats. That armada hasn't arrived.
Really, mate? This has happened over the last decade. Up until less than 2 years ago, Labor wasn't in power. The coalition was in government. And yes, for the whole time the coalition was in government, no asylum seekers made it to the mainland, and they stopped the flow of boats to our waters largely by turning them back. Remember, that was something Anthony Albanese said that he couldn't do.
And when we talk about boats, of course, we're talking about people on boats. I'm of the view that I would just find it... I couldn't ask someone else to do something that I couldn't see myself doing. And if people were in a boat, including families and children, I myself couldn't turn that around. I would want to make sure that they were safe and secure.
Well, now Labor is back in power, of course. More boats have arrived, and to their credit, even they have turned some back. But now 2 drop-offs have occurred on our mainland, the first time in a decade, and of course this could be the start of something worse. It's time for Labor to stop pretending this is a coalition problem, stop trying to score political points against the coalition, and stop defending its own weakness. What it needs to defend is our borders. It needs to show strength here, restore the aerial and maritime surveillance that it's cut since coming to office, and make sure boats don't get through, and make sure the message is sent firmly overseas so that this stops now. If this gets worse, there will be a disastrous humanitarian cost, a worrisome security cost, of course, and always a substantial financial cost. So really, the political cost to Labor now or in the future is the last thing that matters to the rest of us. Why on earth, after 2 decades of trial and error, does Labor still not get this stuff?